Look at almost any piece of Warhammer for okay artwork. Look past the towering space marines, past the grotesque alien monstrosities, and peer into the gothic shadows. You will almost always see them, hovering silently in the gloom, propelled by anti-grav suspensors, trailing scrolls of purity parchment, or carrying flickering lumen globes. The Servo-Skulls, they're the ultimate background detail of the 41st millennium, so ubiquitous that they become practically invisible. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself one chilling question? Whose skull are you actually looking at? It is a question that most citizens of the Imperium never dare to whisper. To them, a Servo-Skull is merely a tool, a mundane piece of everyday machinery no different from a standard cogitator or an autoquill. They flutter through the suffocating archives of holy terror, relay tactical data across blood-soaked battlefields, and light the treacherous paths for Inquisitors navigating the deepest, darkest underhives. Yet, beneath the polished bronze plating, beneath the whirring optical lenses and the tangled cybernetics, lies bone. Real, once living human bone. In our current reality, human remains are generally treated with reverence, laid to rest or returned to the earth in peace. But consider the nightmare reality of Warhammer 40,000. Here, human life is simultaneously the most precious and the absolute cheapest resource available. The Imperium of man spans a million diverse worlds, teeming with untold trillions of struggling souls. When a life is inevitably extinguished, the bureaucratic machine of the Imperium does not mourn. It recalculates, it repurposes. For the vast majority, death brings the oblivion of a corpse grinder or a mass grave. But for a select few, death does not bring the final piece of the Emperor's grace. Instead, death brings a terrifying new beginning. To become a Servo-Skull is officially considered a high honor, a holy reward for a lifetime of devout service to the God Emperor or the Adeptus Mechanicus. Highest scribes, loyal adepts, and trusted servants are theoretically elevated above the unwashed masses upon their passing. But this supposed honor is a concept born of a deeply twisted, fundamentally broken society. It is an eternity of physical servitude, completely stripped of human agency, reduced to a floating processor drone permanently locked inside your own decaying remains. Today, we are going to tear away the bronze plating and decode the horrifying reality behind the Imperium's most iconic creations. If you are ready to face the unfiltered grim darkness of the far future, subscribe to the channel, lock your Geller fields, and let us dive into the macabre truth of the Servo-Skulls. In the 41st millennium, absolutely nothing is wasted. Not steel, not promethium, and certainly not flesh. You must understand that the Imperium of man has long forgotten how to invent. They are a decaying, stagnant civilization surviving entirely on the scavenged remnants of a lost golden age. When a complex machine breaks, it is mourned as a religious tragedy. When a human worker breaks, it is merely a minor logistical inconvenience. But why use a human skull? Why not build a simple floating drone from scratch? Consider this: to forge a completely new cogitator, the imperial equivalent of a mechanical computer requires incredibly rare materials, sacred schematics, and the specialized, hoarded knowledge of the Adeptus Mechanicus. It takes decades of incense-burning rituals just to appease a new machine spirit. But human bodies, they are bred by the trillions in the suffocating depths of the Hive cities. Bone and brain matter are the most abundant resources in the galaxy. There is a darker, more philosophical reason, rooted deep in the blood-soaked history of humanity. Millennia ago, during the forgotten dark age of technology, mankind almost eradicated itself. They created the Men of Iron, a race of abominable intelligences, what we would understand today as true AI. These soulless, hyper-advanced machines rebel, plunging the galaxy into apocalyptic ruin. Since that catastrophic war, Artificial intelligence has been absolutely forbidden under penalty of immediate execution. The religious decree of Mars is absolute. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. So, how do you automate a galactic, interstellar empire without computers? You use the one processor that the cold Mechanicus allows, the human brain. The tech priests learned to graft silicon directly to biological synapses, turning living or formerly living tissue into organic wetware processes. A Servo-Skull, therefore, is not an AI. It is a biological cogitator. It relies on the pre-existing neural pathways of a human brain, carefully lobotomized and chemically treated to prevent independent thought, yet perfectly capable of executing complex routines. When you look at a Servo-Skull, you are not looking at a robot. You are looking at a gruesome, bloody loophole in the most fundamental religious law of the Imperium. Now imagine the sheer, terrifying scale of this Grimdark calculus. To operate the myriad systems of a single void ship, or to manage the punishing tides of a single planet, requires millions of automated tasks. The Imperium literally runs on the harnessed, subjugated computing power of its dead and dying citizens. Death is not an excuse to stop working. In our world, the cessation of a heartbeat is the end of your contract. In the Imperium, it is simply a transfer of departments. The flesh may fail, the lungs may rot, but the cranium itself is a perfectly sculpted, natural armor plating for a delicate neural architecture. It is an exquisite housing, grown entirely for a free by nature, requiring only the brutal scraping away of decaying meat. You are taught from birth that your life belongs to the God Emperor. But they do not just mean your waking hours. They mean the calcium in your bones and the gray matter in your skull. You will serve long after your name is forgotten. The process begins almost immediately upon death. The chosen servant, perhaps a scribe who copied data for 80 years, or a loyal acolyte who died defending an Inquisitor, is laid upon a cold steel slab in the Mechanicus Trojan theater. There is no time for grieving or solemn rites. The flesh is already spoiling, and the Imperium cannot afford to let good biological hardware rot. The air is thick with sacred incense and the metallic scent of blood. The first step is the brutal stripping of humanity. Servitors mindless, lobotomized drones themselves approach with spinning flensing blades and vibrosaws. They meticulously carve away the skin, muscle and cartilage from the face. The eyes, unseeing and clouded with death, are scooped from their sockets and discarded into biological slurry vats. You must realize that in the eyes of the tech priests, this meat is merely useless packaging that housed the true prize. Once the skull is exposed, it is subjected to a violent chemical scouring. Acidic solvents boil away the remaining blood vessels and connective tissues. The bone is bleached and hardened, turning it from a fragile organic structure into a reinforced, armored chassis. It is then engraved with Ben Harik litanies, microscopic prayers to the Omnissiah etched directly into the calcium to ward off the corrupting touch of the war. Now comes the truly horrifying part, the preservation of the brain. The skull cap is carefully removed using a diamantine saw. Inside lies the cooling mass of gray matter. The Mechanicus does not want a completely dead brain. They want a suspended, barely functional processor. Needles inject a cocktail of alchemical preservatives, electrofluids, and synthetic neurostimulants directly into the decaying tissues, forcing the neurons into a state of rested biological death. This is where the line between organic and machine is violently blurred. A cybermantle, a dense web of microcircuitry and connective ports, is forcefully embedded into the base of the skull. Fine golden wires are threaded through the brain tissue, grafting directly onto the surviving synaptic pathways. They are hijacking the organic memories, the ingrained reflexes formed over a lifetime of repetitive labor, and turning them into executing software commands. But consider what happens to the mind during this profane reconstruction. the conscious self, the soul, the personality. These are considered hazardous anomalies by the cold Mechanicus. They are aggressively scrubbed from the brain's architecture. Electroshock therapies and psychic dampeners scour the organic hard drive, attempting to erase every memory, every emotion, and every shred of identity that once made this person human. But the brain is an infinitely complex organ. You cannot always delete a lifetime of fear, devotion, and pain with a simple electrical surge. Deep within the folds of the chemically treated gray matter, fragments of the original psyche often stubbornly cling to existence. A faint echo of a child's laughter, the residual terror of a tyrannid invasion, or the endless, crushing fatigue of the manufacturing assembly line. They are trapped inside a floating, eyeless cage of bone and iron, unable to scream, unable to die, forced to witness the endless horrors of the galaxy as a captive passenger in their own skull. This is the horrifying reality of the Imperium's holy reward. If this level of existential dread fascinates you, make sure to hit that like button, and let us continue our descent into the nightmare of the Mechanicus forges. With the brain subjugated and the cyber mantle installed, the physical augmentations begin. The empty eye sockets, once holding the windows to a human soul, are forcefully widened. High-resolution optical lenses, infrared sensors, or auspex scanners are bolted directly into the bone. Where a human once wept or smiled, there are now only cold, unblinking glass eyes, endlessly recording data from masters who care nothing for the vessel. The jaw, often wired shut or completely removed, is replaced with specialized tools. Depending on its intended function, a Servo-Skull might receive a crackling vox gaster to blare out religious hymns, a surgical laser for field amputations, or a simple set of manipulators to carry a plasma lantern. The human mouth, once used to speak words of love or prayer, is now just a mounting bracket for Imperial war gear. Then comes the means of propulsion. Suspensors, tiny but powerful anti-gravity generators, are fused to the base of the skull, often trailing a chaotic mess of cables, purity seals, and fuel lines. These devices allow the severed head to float effortlessly, defying gravity with a soft, persistent mechanical hum. It is a grotesque parody of flight, a disembodied ghost haunting the physical realm through sheer mechanical force. Finally, the creation must be blessed. A tech priest, wreathed in incense smoke and chanting Binharic canticles, anoints the completed Servo-Skull with sacred unguents. They strike the rune of activation, sending a surge of raw motive force through the grafted circuitry. The dead eyes spark to life with a harsh, artificial light. The suspensors whine as the skull lifts off the surgical slab, a resurrected slave bound to a new eternity. You have to understand the profound blasphemy of this act to our modern sensibilities, contrasted with its absolute sanctity in the 41st millennium. The Adeptus Mechanicus do not see this as desecration. They view the flesh as weak, a temporary and flawed vessel. By carving away the meat and preserving the logical pathways of the brain in iron and bronze, they believe they are elevating the subject closer to the divine machine god. The forging of bone and iron is a perfect encapsulation of the Imperium's brutal pragmatism. It is an industrial process applied to the human soul. They have taken the most universal symbol of death, the human skull, and weaponized it, turning mortality itself into just another cog in an endless, grinding war machine. The dead do not rest in Warhammer 40,000. They are simply reissued as equipment. Just as the living Imperium of man is rigidly divided by impenetrable castes, ancient guilds, and suffocating bureaucracies, so too are the floating dead. A Servo-Skull is never a one-size-fits-all drone. Its physical augmentations and its newly programmed duties are often a dark, ironical reflection of the exact life the victim lived before their demise. The Adeptus Mechanicus do not waste the highly specialized neural pathways forged over decades of repetitive, grueling labor. They actively exploit them, ensuring that your social class dictates your eternal afterlife, consider the tragic existence of the Servo-Skull. In life, this might have been a minor, forgotten adept of the Administratum, a man who spent 80 agonizing years chained to a brass desk. He perfectly copied planetary tithe records by flickering candlelight until his mortal eyes failed, his spine fused, and his lungs succumbed to the dusty parchment spores. In death, his holy reward is to have a silver autoquill bolted violently to his jawbone, and a heavy data sleep bracketed directly to his exposed cranium. There is a profound, soul-crushing irony hidden within this quest. A human brain, an organ originally capable of profound philosophy, beautiful poetry, and deep love, is deliberately crippled to serve as a glorified recording device. The scribe's meticulous attention to detail, once a point of genuine human pride, is now hardwired into a closed loop of binharic code. They are reduced to an airborne tape recorder, completely oblivious to the tragedy of their own eternal enslavement in the very archives where they collapsed and died. Then you have the gun skulls, the grim, floating executioners favored by ruthless Inquisitors and the unforgiving Adeptus Arbites. These were often loyal bodyguards, hardened enforcers, or elite Tempestus Scions who died violently in the line of duty. Instead of resting in a hero's grave, the tech priests harvest their ingrained combat reflexes and spatial awareness. A compact, high-powered loss pistol or a brutal stub revolver is surgically mounted directly into their orbital sockets, or heavily underslung beneath the bleached bone of the lower jaw. A gun skull is a terrifying, unholy synthesis of human survival instinct and digital targeting telemetry. They do not feel fear when a genestealer leaps from the shadows. Their chemically suppressed amygdala simply registers a threat profile and executes the firing subroutine. But imagine the sheer, existential horror of this existence. To be a proud, decorated warrior, once defined by courage, brotherhood, and martial skill, now reduced to a disembodied weapon platform, firing blindly and without honor upon the command of a cold master. We must also examine the unsettling presence of medic skulls. These delicate, macabre creations hover silently round blood-soaked battlefield medicae tents and grim, echoing hospitaller wards. In life, they were highly skilled chirurgeons or deeply compassionate medicae adepts. Their skulls are now heavily festooned with microsurgical lasers, clinking vials of coagulant, and trembling hypodermic needles. They flit from casualty to casualty in the mud, dispensing life-saving chemical stimulants or delivering the cold Emperor's peace to those soldiers who are broken beyond salvation. The gentle human hands that once carefully closed the eyes of the dying have been replaced by cold, unfeeling servo manipulators. They scan failing vital signs with emotionless precision, calculating absolute survival probabilities in mere fractions of a second. The deep, human empathy that originally drove them to heal has been violently excised from their gray matter, leaving only a clinical, mechanical efficiency. They cure the torn flesh of others, but their own spirit is a mutilated, trapped ghost forever denied the comfort they provide. Finally, listen for the booming, inescapable presence of the Vox Skulls. These are often the remains of fiery Ministorum priests or devoted confessors who shouted themselves hoarse preaching the God Emperor's will. Their lower jaws are entirely removed and replaced by heavy, brass-grilled lodhalers. They drift through the toxic, suffocating smog of the underhives or soar above bloody, artillery-pounded trench lines, endlessly blaring recorded hymns and litanies of hate. The voice that once passionately rallied the faithful is now just a distorted, mechanical echo of madness. Before we descend deeper into this nightmare, if you are finding value in decoding these grim truths of the 41st millennium, take a moment to subscribe and share this video. Your support fuels the data crypts. Now, consider the most chilling philosophical question of all. The Adeptus Mechanicus assures the Imperium that the original consciousness is entirely wiped clean during the creation process, leaving only biological circuitry. They claim it is a holy, painless existence. But what if the tech priests are entirely wrong? There are deeply disturbing reports heavily suppressed by the Inquisition. Whispers in the dark, suffocating corners of archive vaults speak of Servo-Skulls exhibiting inexplicable, unprogrammed behaviors. A scribe skull might violently twitch when a specific heretical text is open. A gun skull, forged from a fallen bodyguard, might instinctively drift to shield its former master's surviving child, completely ignoring direct override commands from its current handler. These are not mere glitches in the Inherent code. These are the agonizing echoes of a soul refusing to be erased. Imagine the absolute, suffocating terror if even a fraction of human consciousness remains trapped within that bleached bone chassis. You have no voice to scream, no hands to fight back, and no eyelids to close against the unspeakable horrors of the galaxy. You are a silent, captive prisoner, locked behind thick optical lenses, forced to observe endless wars, demonic incursions, and the crushing decay of your own species, century after century. It is a sensory deprivation tank built from your own skull. The physical body may be gone, but phantom pain is a well-documented medical phenomenon. Now apply that concept to a lobotomized brain suspended forever in alchemical fluids. Some inquisitorial acolytes have documented a truly horrifying sight during quiet, agonizing moments of transit in the war. They report seeing their assigned Servo-Skulls hovering in the cold shadows, their optical lenses leaking a slow, viscous trail of dark fluid. The skull has no tear ducts, yet it weeps. It is crying tears of industrial machine oil. What agonizing realization triggers these mechanical tears? Is it a sudden, flashing memory of a past life, a loved one's face, or the warm touch of sunlight on skin, instantly crushed by the cold reality of their metal prison? The cult Mechanicus dismisses this phenomenon as a mere fluid pressure imbalance within the cybermantle. But anyone who has stared deeply into the lifeless, glowing eye of a weeping skull knows the truth. The ghost is still trapped in the machine, and it is suffering endlessly. This horrifying reality shatters the comfortable illusion of the Imperium's holy reward. Becoming a Servo-Skull is not a peaceful ascension into the Emperor's divine grace. It is the absolute, ultimate violation of the self. It proves that in Warhammer 40,000, true damnation does not always require the intervention of chaos gods or the treacherous whispers of the war. Sometimes, the most profound torment is meticulously engineered by human hands, sanctioned by a fanatical religion, and packaged as an honor you cannot refuse. To truly understand the profound horror of the Servo-Skull, you must look away from the agonizing creation process and observe the deeply unsettling relationship they share with the living. The Warhammer 40,000 universe is a place of suffocating, crushing isolation. In a galaxy teeming with untold trillions of desperate, starving souls, true companionship is incredibly rare. Paranoia is the standard baseline of everyday survival. In this cold, merciless void, a floating, lobotomized human head often becomes a person's absolute closest confidant. Consider the agonizing life of an Imperial Inquisitor. They walk paths of absolute darkness, forced to constantly suspect their peers, their trusted acolytes, and even their own shadows. Everyone is a potential heretic, an alien sympathizer, or a hidden assassin waiting to strike. But a Servo-Skull, it represents pure, hardwired, and mathematically guaranteed loyalty. It cannot betray you to the ruinous powers. Many Inquisitors find themselves quietly speaking to their skulls in the empty, terrifying hours of the long night. They confess their crushing doubts, their darkest sins, and their overwhelming fears to a silent, hovering piece of dead bone. Now we imagine the profound irony of the Adeptus Mechanicus. The tech priests aggressively reject the inherent weakness of human flesh, systematically replacing their own bodies with cold steel. Yet, they constantly surround themselves with these heavily mutilated human remains. They treat their designated skulls as perfect, silent apprentices, gently polishing their bronze casings in a grotesque pantomime of genuine human affection. This bizarre behavior reveals a deeply disturbing paradox about human nature. Even in the grim darkness of the far future, where empathy is systematically beaten out of the populace from birth, the human mind still desperately craves connection. In our modern era, people naturally pack bond with inanimate objects or robotic vacuums. In the rotting heart of the Imperium, they form deep emotional attachments to mutilated corpses. They project a comforting illusion of friendship onto a victim of absolute state-sanctioned torture. This twisted dynamic often escalates into a sickening parody of pet ownership. Some eccentric, deeply lonely masters actually name their skulls, speaking to them with fond, affectionate tones. They meticulously adorn their bone chassis with sacred purity seals, treating them like cherished ribbons. When a favored skull is finally destroyed in the heat of battle, an Inquisitor might actually experience a genuine pang of grief, mourning a broken machine while completely ignoring the brutal deaths of 1,000 living soldiers. But what if we view this companionship from the horrifying perspective of that lingering, trapped soul we discussed earlier? You are treated like a favored hound by the very system that violently murdered your human autonomy. You are forced to silently listen to the intimate, tearful confessions of a deeply paranoid master. You are the ultimate captive audience, unable to offer comfort, unable to scream in protest, and completely unable to judge the brutal monsters who control your dead flesh. This bizarre form of companionship brilliantly highlights the ultimate, overarching tragedy of the Imperium of man. Genuine, unfiltered human connection is so stout, so inherently dangerous, and so heavily policed by the brutal state religion, that citizens are forced to find comfort in the macabre. True love, brotherhood, and trust have been systematically replaced by programmed subservience and enforced loyalty. The Servo-Skull is the only safe friend you can possibly have in a society that violently burns people for one thing. It is a sickening, profoundly tragic mockery of true friendship. The Master speaks softly to the hovering skull, desperately projecting their own lost humanity onto its polished bone, while willfully ignoring the horrifying reality of the organic cage they are holding. It is a lonely, terrified tyrant talking to a captive audience of one. The true darkness of the 41st millennium is not just found in the endless, bloody wars. It is found in the total corruption of the human heart itself. When you step back and truly analyze the Servo-Skull, you realize it is far more than just a macabre piece of floating technology. It is the absolute, perfect microcosm of the Imperium of man itself. Every single horrifying aspect of humanity's rotting interstellar empire is brilliantly and disgustingly encapsulated within that single, hovering piece of bleached bone. It is the ultimate physical manifestation of a civilization that has completely lost its way. Think about the fundamental nature of the Imperium. It is a decaying, stagnant behemoth, entirely incapable of genuine innovation or forward progress. It survives purely by cannibalizing its own glorious, forgotten past. The Servo-Skull mirrors this perfectly. It is literally built upon the dead remains of what came before. It does not create new thoughts. It merely recycles old, lobotomized neural pathways to perform repetitive, stagnant tasks in an endless loop of blind obedience. Look at the absolute devaluation of human life. The Imperium feeds trillions of its own citizens into the meat grinder of endless galactic war, treating them as nothing more than cheap, disposable currency. The creation of a Servo-Skull takes this brutal philosophy to its logical, terrifying extreme. It proves that the ruthless state owns you completely. They own your waking hours, your blood, and eventually, the very calcium of your skull after you perish. Observe the suffocating fusion of fanatical religion and technological ignorance. The Adeptus Mechanicus do not truly understand the ancient cybermentals they forcefully install into the bone. They simply chant Bienheric prayers, apply sacred unguents, and hope the machine's spirit awakens. They dress up crude, barbaric butchery as a holy, divine ascension. The Servo-Skull is a monument to a society that worships technology as magic, completely blind to the agonizing horrors they actively commit. Consider the violent eradication of individuality. To survive in the Imperium, you must surrender your personal identity to the collective and thinking mass. You are merely a tiny cog in the grand machine. The Servo-Skull is the ultimate realization of this grim necessity. Your face is violently flensed away. Your memories are chemically purged, and your unique soul is aggressively scrubbed clean. You are forcibly transformed from a complex human being into a standardized tool. Ultimately, the Servo-Skull is the Imperium staring directly into a cracked mirror. It is a terrifying, mutilated thing, desperately propped up by forgotten, failing technology, and completely blind to its own horrific nature. It floats aimlessly in the encroaching darkness, performing meaningless, repetitive tasks while the galaxy burns round it. By understanding the true, macabre nature of the Servo-Skull, you finally understand the absolute, inescapable doom of humanity in the 41st millennium. In the end, the ultimate tragedy of the Servo-Skull is the complete and utter denial of final rest. Across human history and across almost every culture, death has always been viewed as the great equalizer, the final release from the pain and suffering of the mortal coil. But the Imperium of Man has successfully conquered even the grave. They have weaponized the afterlife, ensuring that your duty to the God Emperor truly never ends, even when your heart stops beating and your flesh rots away into dust. So, the next time you look at a magnificent piece of Warhammer 40,000 artwork, do not just glance past the floating background details. Look closely at that hovering, mechanical skull illuminating the gothic darkness. Remember the brutal flensing blades, the cold alchemical fluids, and the terrifying possibility of a shattered human soul trapped inside its own bleached bones. You are not looking at a mere robotic tool. You are looking at a tortured ghost, silently screaming in a galaxy that simply does not care. This is the unfiltered, macabre reality of the 41st millennium, where even the dead are drafted into eternal servitude. If this deep dive into the grim darkness has opened your eyes, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the data crypts below. What are the terrifying secrets of the Imperium should we decode next? Until then, guard your thoughts, revere the Emperor, and pray you're never granted the holy honor of the Mechanicus.